Donc rebonjour à tous et bonjour à ceux qui n'étaient pas présents ce matin. On va commencer donc le deuxième panel de cet après-midi, donc qui a pour titre l'émancipation de la majorité mondiale, un défi pour l'Europe. Comme vous le verrez, on a la chance d'avoir beaucoup d'intervenants qui viennent du continent africain qui prendront la parole par vidéo cet après-midi.
On the emancipation of the world majority, a challenge for Europe. To honor Africa, we have decided to start with a musical introduction. Joanna Claire will direct the chorus called Nkosi Sikele I Africa.
Bonjour, bonjour à tous.
Hello.
Alors,
donc,
vous allez voir
une
portion de la chorale internationale de l'Institut Schiller, puisque l'Institut Schiller a des chorales.
The International Chorus of the Schiller Institute. We have choruses in the United States, in France, Denmark,
de Suède, d'Allemagne.
Sweden, and Germany.
Merci
Thanks
aux choristes de venir.
to the singers. Please come on the stage.
Et donc pendant ce temps, je vais
singers.
vous dire deux mots sur ce qu'on va vous chanter. Donc ce chant,
give you an idea of what we'll sing. Nkosi Sikele I Africa, that God bless Africa. Today, it's the hymn of South Africa. There's an arrangement in 4 voices for our chorus. In fact, originally,
de résistance en fait,
it's
des mouvements qui se sont battus
from the
pour
resistance movements
l'indépendance,
which fought for the independence of South Africa and this area, the whole region.
Voilà, donc sur ce, je vous présente donc la chorale, une partie de la chorale de l'Institut Schiller International.
Ok. Donc merci pour cette belle introduction musicale de la chorale de l'Institut Schiller International. Donc on va commencer tout de suite ce deuxième panel de l'après-midi qui s'appelle donc l'émancipation de la majorité mondiale, un défi pour l'Europe. On aura le temps à la fin, bien entendu, de ce panel de pouvoir discuter ensemble. Il y aura des questions et des réponses. Mais tout de suite, j'appelle la présidente de l'Institut Schiller, Madame Elga Tsepp-Larouche. Merci de l'applaudir.
Bonjour, je vais parler français aujourd'hui. La prochaine fois. Well, I want to speak to you about the new World Economic Order based on the principle of the coincidentia oppositorum, the coincidence of opposites. Now, I have to start with the following. An institution called Economic Society for Westphalia and Lippe, they and a jury of personalities of politics and business consisting out of Sigmar Gabriel, Cem Özdemir, Friedrich Merz, and Frank-Walter Steinmeier decided to give the Westphalian Peace Prize for 2026 to NATO. The reason given is for the continuous peace work of NATO, and they give a prize of 100,000 euro. They have to split it with a youth organization called Socio Movens, which is tasked to give the Western-oriented youth culture to bring that into Eastern Europe. So it's one of these typical NGOs trying to prepare color revolution kind of things. Now, if one wanted to be sarcastic, one could say NATO urgently needs the money to get war ready, because obviously they are not. Next year, there is supposed to be a big celebration in the City Hall of the Peace of Westphalia in Münster. Now, I don't know if you have a feeling what a perversion and what a complete upside-down approach this is. So I propose to give the Economic Society of Westphalia and Lippe the George Orwell Prize of 2026. Now, many of you know George Orwell. He has written many books, probably the most famous one, 1984, which describes, the absolute doublespeak, doublethink, newspeak, out of which they then coined the notion of doublespeak as the new word for lying and manipulation through language. So, for example, in 1984, in this play, the Ministry of Torture is called Ministry for Love. The Ministry for Lies and Propaganda is called Ministry for Truth. The Ministry for Starvation Management is called Ministry of Abundance, and so forth and so on. So the obvious complete Goebbels made by such an approach, you can see in the arguments given for the decision to give this prize to NATO. It is the responsible support for NATO, for Ukraine, that NATO coordinates the aid in line with international law, in solidarity, but without becoming itself a part of the conflict party. Now, this is quite unbelievable because contrary to the official NATO narrative, who insists that everybody who speaks about Ukraine must start his speech with the sentence, "the unprovoked, illegitimate war of aggression by Russia." Now, this is obviously one of such absolute doublespeaks we should not tolerate anymore, because everybody who has a historic memory will remember the promises given at the time of the German unification and the time of the end of the Cold War, where Foreign Secretary of State Baker and Hans Friedrich Genscher were all promising to Gorbachev, to Shevardnadze, that NATO will not move 1 inch to the east. Now, what followed were 5 eastward expansions of NATO. It's now 6. Sweden and Finland have joined without asking the population, by the way, if they agreed with it. So it's now 1,000 kilometers to the east, plus a few kilometers. So we have a full-fledged Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse. NATO, if you followed the events of the last decades also, has been an instrument to establish an unipolar world domination based on the Anglo-American special relationship. Under the aegis of NATO, you had regime change, color revolution, interventionist wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and so forth. Now, by the time the prize is supposed to be given next year, there is no question that the Ukraine war will have been lost, because it's lost already now. So what is obviously needed is a radical, if this dynamic is not supposed to lead into an escalation which could end up in a global nuclear war, we need a complete rejection of any form of doublespeak and a radical change in the approach to international politics in the West. We have to replace the policy of, we have to inflict a strategic defeat to Russia, because such a defeat is completely impossible, because Russia is already by now the strongest nuclear power, latest with the Oreshnik, the Burevestnik, and Poseidon. Russia has developed the technological military edge, and therefore it cannot be defeated. What can happen is that all of mankind is eliminated. If you look at the situation in Southwest Asia, despite the peace plan, which started supposedly on October 11th, more than 200 people have been killed, more than 600 wounded in one night, over 104 children, 46 of them being children. Altogether, 10% of the entire Palestinian population has been eliminated. Now the next chapter, the unprovoked war against Venezuela, is supposed to start, which, according to a new memorandum of the Veterans for Sanity in Intelligence, could not have a good end, but would lead to various degrees of bloodshed and potentially a complete revolt of the entire Latin American continent against the United States, where, in the worst case, you could have an entanglement of Russia and China. Not even to mention the coming war with China, which the warmongers have been dreaming of for quite some time. So if you take a step back and you look at the present world as if you could see it from the double ISS in space, or even a higher point of view, that you could look at the world from above space and time, what view of humanity you would see? Well, we are obviously not a species of uneducated, nasty toddlers. Not all toddlers are nasty, but I have made the experience that some of them kick quite good against your leg. A nation or continent of nasty toddlers who, after playing Pokemon and then violent video games, then play with nuclear missiles until we all dead? Or are we the creative species gifted with reason? The big question in front of us, in front of all of humanity, is can we give ourselves an international order which establishes durable peace and a harmonious development of all nations and civilizations on Earth? Because it is exactly that which is needed. We, in earnest, very realistically and practically, need a new global and security and development architecture which must take into account the interest of security and development for every single country on the planet. Now, there is a big precedent for that. Jacques referred to it this morning, the Peace of Westphalia. In 1948, it ended 150 years of religious war in Europe, and it was the beginning of the establishment of international law, the law of the people. And the most important principles which it came up with was the idea that any peace does require that you always have to take into account the interest of the other. That for the sake of peace, you have to replace hate with love. That for the sake of peace, you have to forgive and forget all the lists of crimes committed to one side to the other or vice versa. And obviously, it established the principle of indivisible peace. All of these have been violated by NATO. It established the principle of sovereignty and non-interference, that every state has exclusively the sovereignty over its territory and domestic affairs. Now, NATO clearly has violated that, if not in words, but in principle, if one remembers the words of Victoria Nuland, that the State Department spent alone for NGOs in Ukraine $5 billion, which was the preparation of the Orange Revolution and then the Maidan. The Peace of Westphalia also established the principle of non-interference into the internal matters of other countries. Now, 20 years Afghanistan, NATO tried to impose Western values, and you all remember what the outcome was, the people hanging by the airplane as the planes left from Kabul. NATO is identical with the principle of interventionist wars, the right to protect, the abandoning of the Peace of Westphalia. It's such a, I mean, if you know this history, it's such an insight to the intelligence of Europeans and other citizens to give the Peace Prize to NATO. It also established the principle of cuius regio, eius religio, which means that in whatever country you are, you have the right for your own religion. It guaranteed, for example, Christians the right to practice their faith in public during designed hours. This has been also violated continuously by the demonization of Islam and by the demonization of the Russian Orthodox Church. The Peace of Westphalia also established that all states, regardless of their size or power, are equal in international law. It created a system of coexisting states, and it set as a precedent the principle of diplomacy as for conflict resolution, not war. It ended war. It redefined the territorial boundaries across Europe, removed wartime trade barriers, guaranteed a degree of free navigation on the Rhine, and created a new system of political order based on sovereign states. But most importantly, it established diplomacy as a way of conflict resolution. None of what NATO has done reflects the spirit of the Peace of Westphalia. The different war parties came together at that time because they realized that if the war would continue, there would be absolutely nobody alive to enjoy the victory, given the fact that already 1/3 of the people, the animals, the villages had been destroyed. And is that not more the case now than ever, that if the war continues, nobody will enjoy the result because nobody will outlive a global nuclear war? Recently, the US think tank RAND Corporation changed an earlier estimate that it would be better to have the war with China earlier because of the spectacular rise of China. It had to be expected that the longer one waits, the more China will have an advantage. So that policy just now has been replaced by something which they call controlled rivalry, obviously because they realize that the train has left the station and that the United States could not win a war with China at this point. But then the paper concludes that a cooperative coexistence is not possible because the two countries have no common interest. Now that is a very important axiomatic assumption which we have to attack, because if mankind cannot move beyond this idea that two countries have no common interest, that there is nothing which unites them, then the logical outcome will be World War III. And that is why we are giving such a very high importance to the intervention by Pope Leo XIV, where he, in his recent Jubilee address on the 25th of October, revoked the name of Nikolaus of Kos and the idea of the coincidence of opposites. I quote Leo XIV. He said, "In another troubled age, the 15th century, the Church had a cardinal who is still little known today. He was a great thinker and a servant of unity. His name was Nicholas, and he came from Kos in Germany, and he is known as Nikolaus of Kusa. Many of his contemporaries lived in fears. Others took up arms and prepared new crusades. Nicholas, however, from a young age, chose to keep company with those who had hope. And with those he developed into new disciplines, reread the classics, and returned to the sources. He believed in humanity. He understood that there are opposites which must be held together, that God is a mystery in what it is intentions to find unity. Nicholas knew that he did not know, and thus came to understand reality ever more deeply." Now, for those who know church history, this is an absolutely revolutionary statement, because you have two traditions in the Catholic Church. You had what you can call the fundamentalist faction, those who were saying that only the Bible gives you knowledge what Jesus Christ and Christianity is all about. But then you had another faction which was called the Augustinian tradition, which believed that there is no contradiction between faith and science. And I make the argument that all progress in European history in science and art comes from the influence of the second tradition. While the first tradition has been the obstacle, these have been the people who got us into crusades, into religious wars, into the worst chapters of humanity. So Nikolaus of Kos was put on the index after the Council of Trent. That meant you could not read his writings, that you were not allowed to praise his works. And that lasted quite a while, and that had as a result that Nikolaus of Kusa, despite his absolute super role in bringing the Renaissance about in the Golden Renaissance in Italy, was practically sidelined. There were some people who knew a book, but it was completely, in some monastery you had some writings, but it was not a common discussion. And as recently, I think it must have been 92, one of the 90s, I went to Brazil, to a city in the southwest of Brazil, Anápolis, where I met with the whole order, a Dominican order. And it was a huge session about Kusa, because they knew that I was advertising Kusa, and they brought books And they said, no, this is a heretic, he is a complete, not belonging to the church. And we had a long argument of several hours. So they made it a big point, to convince me, to get me off this heresy, which obviously they did not succeed. But for the Pope to take that position not only means what I'm going to say now, but from the standpoint of the internal hygiene of the church, because the church always would put all the cardinals, all the popes in one line. They would not say this was a good pope, this was a bad pope. For them, it's church history. But the Pope, in one speech, saying, that there were others who took up arms and prepared new crusades, is a very clear factional statement against those who were behind the crusades. So Leo XIV's extended reference to Nicolaus of Cous, which I only quoted very briefly, is therefore of the highest strategic importance, because it is a method of thinking which makes the resolution of seemingly impossible problems possible, because he introduces a completely different approach. In order to understand this method, one has to begin with a complete rejection of the Aristotelian method of thinking in contradictions, in opposites. For example, that A can never be B, which is one of the most important statements in the traditional logic, which they regard as an ontological principle. Aristotle writes in his book Metaphysics, but the most certain principle of all, where an error is absolutely impossible, which one is that is, we now want to state, because it is impossible that the same concerns the same in the same relationship and at the same time does not concern it. But we have just assumed, what we have just assumed just now, that it is impossible that something is at the same time and is not. Now that gives you in a nutshell the creed of the logic school. Nicolaus developed a different principle in the Docta Ignorantia, which basically only some years he found out that a prominent, or one of the most prominent German Aristotelians, scholastics of his time, Johannes Wenck, had attacked it in a counter-writing called De Ignota Literatura, by calling it a heresy. Now, Cusa answered it in a writing called Apologia Doctae Ignorantiae, which is a short writing, and if you want to get into this difficult terrain, because it's all written in the language of the 15th century, naturally, you start with that Apologia, because that gives you the immediate center of the controversy. There he says that unfortunately the Aristotelian sect, which is dominating the church today, who, as Philo already had emphasized, would not think on a higher level than the ratio, the rational thinking of animals, because any animal can also think and draw conclusions out of things. That's not a big accomplishment. Therefore, it would be almost a miracle if they, the Aristotelian sect, abandons Aristotle and succeeds to think on a higher level. Unlike the Aristotelian method, which gets entangled in the fight between contradictions, the viewpoint of the coincidence is as if watching the developments from a high tower. If you're standing on a high tower, from above you see the searcher, the person who is searching, the searched, that what is being searched, and the process of the searching. In other words, you have a completely different dynamic view of the matter. Nicolaus also developed the notion of prescience, a foresight of what to look for, because without that prescience, you have a result and you do not know if what you found is what you have searched for. Now that is obviously the fate of all people who are searching the internet all day, because they find things and they don't know if what they found is what they looked for, because they have no criteria of what the method was. In another writing called De Visione Dei, which is a beautiful writing, where it's written to the monks of Tegernsee, it's a lake in Bavaria, where he tries to describe how you can become self-conscious about this principle, that he has an icon, and then all the monks are standing in a half circle around the icon, but by moving from one monk to the other, each one of them has the feeling that the icon, the Christ, looks at you directly. So it is a way of introducing in a manuductio, in a pedagogical way, how you get to the wall of contradictions, where, as a last step, you have to mentally jump over a wall, because you cannot access this wall of contradictions unless you completely change your outlook. So Cusa applied this method and solved a problem which all thinkers before him failed to resolve, the quadrature of the circle. Cusa rejected the erroneous assumption of Archimedes, who had used the method of exhaustion by adding ever more corners to a polygon inside and outside the circumference of the circle, that one would eventually arrive at the commensurability of the two geometrical forms, that the many corners, polygon and the circle, would become one. Cusa rejected that and insisted that the more corners you add to the polygon, the more you get distant from the circle, because the two are incommensurable. Now, Nikolaus developed also what Professor Herbst, who was one of the founders of the Cusano Society and who deserves most of the credit of having caused the renaissance of Nikolaus of Cus, because he knew everything, he knew where what handwriting was. He would tell his pupils, go to this British museum or library and you find it there, and mostly they did. So he was very instrumental of recollecting all the sermons and other writings, and caused actually excitement internationally in the intellectual academic community. Nikolaus also developed what this Professor Herbst called the biogenic law of evolution, which is the idea that in the hierarchy of species, no species is developed to its fullest potential unless it participates at least in one point in the next higher species. But not from the lower to the higher, but vice versa, from the highest to the lowest. In God, the One, all contradictory substantial causes exist in a fundamental connectivity before they separate into differentiations. Man is elevated to its fullest accentuation by participating in God through his vis creativa, through his creative power. So man only is fully man if he participates in God's creativity and becomes a second God. The animal develops to its utmost potential only by participating in man. Everybody knows that, because the difference between a house animal and a wild animal. So the method of thinking of the coincidence of opposites enables one to think the one humanity in all its complexity and development first, not in a static way, but one where the continuous development is of an ontological primary reality. Therefore, the resolution of conflicts is not done based on the Aristotelian method of contradiction, where one can find a compromise based on the smallest common denominator or some arithmetic equation, but one finds that inherent principle which emanates from the higher oneness, which pulls up everybody, uplifts the orientation of all conflict parties to see the common interest and the oneness of their goal. That oneness is not uniformity, but to the contrary, it is a mutually beneficial cooperation between sovereign states which respect the different systems of society and work together like in a contrapuntal fugue where the completion of each component interacts with the optimizing the next one, and where the energy of the system, so to speak, increases for all participants. Harmony in the macrocosm, peace on earth, can only exist if all microcosms, all nations, develop their fullest potential and regard it as their self-best interest to support the development of all other macrocosms and vice versa. And the more this occurs, the more the degrees of freedom are created, the richer becomes the composition of mankind. Is that principle of the coincidence of opposites just a theory? No, it is actually the philosophical outlook in policies of leaders of the global majority trying to establish a new economic and political system. President Xi Jinping developed the idea of a shared future of mankind, which is the one humanity. But he also developed 4 initiatives called the Global Security, Global Development, Global Civilizational, and Global Governance Initiative, where especially the last one, the Global Governance Initiative, is a very beautiful, concrete elaboration of the principles of Peace of Westphalia, whereby it is exactly said how nations relate to each other, that it does not matter if they're small or big, that each of them have an equal voice, nobody can be overruled based on their sheer might, that the non-interference must be respected even for the smallest country, and so forth and on. It's a very elaborated concept. But also President Putin has called for a new Eurasian security architecture, where nations are cooperating like instruments playing together in a symphonic composition. And at his speech at the recent Valdai Club, an annual meeting of intellectuals debating, he said, today's world is an exceptionally complex, multifaceted system. To properly describe and comprehend it, simple laws of logic, cause and effect relationships, and the patterns arising from them are insufficient. What is needed here is a philosophy of complexity, something akin to quantum mechanics, which is wiser and in some ways more complex than classical physics. Now here you have 2 leaders of major countries of the global south with a clear rejection of the Aristotelian method. So let's take this conception of Nicolaus of Cusa, of the coincidence of opposite, to shape our policies towards all nations around the world. What that means is we have to make a holy commitment to get the countries of Europe and the United States to jointly cooperate with the BRICS, the SCO, the ASEAN, CELAC, the Eurasian Economic Union, the African Union, the OIC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, and similar organizations to join hands in the industrialization of Africa. Africa will have, by the year 2050, 2.5 billion people. That is 1 billion people more. It's the only continent where is demographic growth. All others are stagnating. That means we have to create 1 billion new productive jobs in the next 5 years, in the next 25 years. Now, one very beautiful example of how that can occur is the GERD, that's the Great Renaissance Ethiopian Dam, Renaissance dam, which was built in only a few years, I think 5 years, through a cooperation between Chinese, Ethiopian, Italian, and French companies. And it cost only 5 billion, which in this case they raised through the issuing of bonds, which was bought entirely by Ethiopian citizens. Now, the 5 billion will be basically immortalized, I don't know if that's an English word, in 5 years, because, you know, it takes 5 years to cover 1 billion per year. And after 5 years, it will be profitable. And, you know, Ethiopia is already starting now to export electricity to its neighbor countries after fulfilling its own requirements. And that is an absolute feasible example which can be replicated with the Inga Dam of Congo, with the Transaqua project, which would take 5% or 3% of the water from the Congo River at 500-meter height and bring it through a system of canals and rivers to Lake Chad, industrializing 12 countries along the way and creating irrigation for the Sahel zone, making agriculture possible, and you know, helping to fight the instability in that region. Now, obviously, it needs to be connected with the Bering Strait tunnel, which will be can be built in, you know, a few weeks. We could start, because it has been a topic between the United States and Russia in the talks between Trump and Putin. That would then open up the infrastructure connection between the Americas. So soon you could travel with fast trains from the southern tip of Chile and Argentina all the way up through Latin America, Central America, North America, Canada, Alaska, Bering Strait Tunnel, Eurasia to Spain, then to Gibraltar. You go through the to-be-built tunnel through the Gibraltar Strait, and you continue all the way with a train system to the Cape of Good Hope. So you can practically, in a few days, travel around the world, because, you know, other tracks naturally would go from China, Iran, India, Southeast Asia, until, you know, the Philippines with ferries and other means. So the idea of having an international infrastructure network, which in a few days connects or makes travel possible in a few days, connecting all of humanity, will change the mentality of people totally, because infrastructure changes the way people think. That has been proven in history every time it was done. It is one of the key ideas of Kraft-Ericke, the famous German rocket scientist who developed this notion of the extraterrestrial imperative, where he said that basically, you know, the identity of people will fundamentally change once they do joint space travel, because, you know, the way people relate to each other will completely be different. And we see it with the astronauts on the double ISS already, who never would think this is a Russian, this is an American, but they think we are the astronauts who look at the little planet Earth as just a tiny blue planet, fragile in a huge universe of trillions and trillions of galaxies. I mean, just try to think trillions of galaxies and you get a sense of why we have to change our view completely and not have our nose on the ground, but look with the eyes up in the stars. So we are the creative species, and therefore we can create a new era of mankind. So rather than giving NATO the Westphalian Peace Prize, let's in earnest build a new security and development architecture and dissolve NATO. Follow the advice of Leo XIV, who also said that what was special about Nicolaus of Cus was that he reread the classics, which he did, because he advertised, like all the humanists of his time and all times, that in order to find truth, do not read the footnotes of professors, go back to Plato, go back to Augustine, go to the sources. because that is at the same time the best medicine against the truth ministry, and it teaches you how to think for yourself and find the truth and be inoculated against such efforts of manipulation. So let's, with joy and optimism, start this task.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Larouche. Donc, on va désormais montrer quelques vidéos d'intervenants de
Mrs. Larouche.
justement du
We will
continent
show
africain.
some videos of our French from the African continent. We will start now avec Princy MTHOMBENI, which is a founder of Africa for Nuclear, specialist of nuclear energy. She participates in numerous COP, climate international conference, and she could, in many international conferences, defend her ideas.
Distinguished participants, fellow speakers, colleagues, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, I greet you all in the true French spirit. Bon après-midi. My name is Princess MTHOMBENI, but many people call me Princy. And yes, that's also how you'll find me on social media. It's truly an honor to join you virtually from sunny South Africa and to be part of this important conversation taking place in Paris, a city whose lights hardly go out, powered in large by nuclear energy. So even though I couldn't be there in person, but it feels symbolic to connect from one part of the world that is still struggling with energy security to another that has long mastered it. I was born and bred in the village called Keynote in KwaZulu-Natal province here in South Africa. When I was growing up, there was no electricity, no running water, and no reason to imagine that a girl from there would one day speak about nuclear power at a conference in Paris. So when I speak about energy poverty, I don't speak from theory. I speak from experience and from memory. The title of my talk today is Africa Must Go Critical. In the nuclear world, when a reactor goes critical, it means it has reached a self-sustaining chain reaction. Power is flowing and the system is alive. Paris, and indeed much of France, enjoys that light today because their reactors went critical decades ago. And that's exactly what I want for Africa, for our nations to go critical, to reach that self-sustaining point where our growth, our innovation, and our progress are powered by our own capacity, not by external permission or borrowed energy. Energy is not just electricity. It's the heartbeat of development. Without reliable energy, no country can industrialize. It means no factories, no hospitals, no innovation, and sadly, no dignity. Today, more than 600 million Africans live without electricity. Do you know what that means? It means more than 600 million dreams, more than 600 million untapped ideas, more than 600 million futures waiting to switch on. And this is why I fight for energy sovereignty, because no nation can be truly free if it cannot power itself. And for Africa, nuclear energy offers that pathway, reliable, clean, and capable of transforming not just economies, but lives. For me, energy justice is human justice. It's the belief that every African child deserves the dignity of light, not as a luxury, but as a birthright. And that justice demands honesty. If Europe and the rest of the West industrialized through coal, gas, nuclear, and hydro, then how can Africa be told to rely only on intermittent renewables? If financing conditions limit Africa's choices, then it's no longer about climate, it's about control. True justice means giving Africa access to the same range of technologies that powered Europe's prosperity, including nuclear. It means a trust, partnership, respect. And let me be clear, this generation of young Africans will not allow any form of colonialism, even if it comes dressed in green energy deals. They are awake, they are informed, and they are determined to make sure that Africa's energy future is powered by fairness, not fear. This conference asked, what does the emancipation of Africa mean for Europe? And my answer to that is, it means rethinking the relationship. It means moving from aid to alliance, from seeing Africa as a beneficiary to recognizing Africa as a co-architect of the future. Europe can play a transformative role, not by preaching, but by partnering, by investing in African nuclear R&D, by supporting regional training centers and local manufacturing. And most importantly, by creating fair financing instruments that make it possible for African nations to build and operate their own reactors safely and sustainably. We are not asking for permission. We are asking for parity, not for charity, but for collaboration. Because partnership is not about who gives and who receives. It's about who builds together. When I founded Africa for Nuclear, my dream was to show that nuclear energy in Africa is not just about power plants. It's about possibility. Across the continent, I see young engineers, scientists, and innovators who are ready to lead that transformation, design reactors, develop nuclear medicine, and create local value chains. Imagine an Africa where our uranium fuels progress, not politics. That is the Africa I see, the Africa that is beginning to go critical. In conclusion, I want to leave you with this. As the old energy order fades, the world has a choice to either rebuild it around dependency or around dignity. Europe can be part of Africa's renaissance, not as a donor, but as a partner. Because when Africa goes critical, it will not just illuminate our continent, it will energize the world. Thank you, and I wish you well with your conference.
Donc la prochaine intervenante est de Côte d'Ivoire, donc c'est Filomène Ebi Ngodo, qui normalement sera avec nous en direct de la Côte d'Ivoire pour la période de questions-réponses, et donc qui est docteur en histoire des relations internationales. Elle est également sinologue, elle parle couramment chinois, elle a fait plusieurs voyages là-bas. Elle est enseignante-chercheur à l'université Alassane Ouattara à Bouaké en Côte d'Ivoire, pour ceux qui connaissent. Et donc, elle va nous parler justement de l'histoire des relations franco-ivoiriennes et sino-ivoiriennes de ces dernières décennies. Donc, la vidéo de Filomène.
Bonjour à tous et à toutes.
Good day to everyone,
Et à tous les organisateurs de cette
to the Schiller Institute and all the organizers. I am going to speak about the mutations going on in our society right now. My name is Ebi Ngodo Filomène, a doctor in I have been to the University of Ouattara in the Ivory Coast. Now I would like to talk to you about the Sino-Ivorian or Franco-Ivorian economic cooperation from 1994 to 2024 on the dynamics and challenges. So what is really motivating this topic? When we look at the terrain, or at least the architectural landscape in Ivory Coast, we see that from the beginning of the 1960s until the end of the 20th century, almost all infrastructure was financed and carried out by Western companies, especially French ones. However, since the beginning of the 21st century, we see a change, even a coexistence, with new partners in the development of the Ivory Coast, including China. So we asked ourselves, how do these two partners position themselves in the economic development of the Côte d'Ivoire? In other words, how have they performed in the domain of infrastructure in the Ivory Coast? The objective of this presentation is to analyze the evolution of the commitments of these two partners for infrastructure development in the Ivory Coast up until 2024, and also to show the implications of their performance in our country. So to do this, we collected documents from written sources, and we prioritized oral interviews and especially observations. Being on the ground in the Côte d'Ivoire, it allowed us to observe for a long period and witness the changes that had occurred year after year, which is why we can comment on these potential changes. We don't necessarily have very up-to-date figures, so we will concentrate more on the qualitative aspects, which is why we are also considering observation as an element of our analysis. We're going to turn around 3 points. First, we will examine the French influence or perceptions, and then we will show the Chinese advances on the ground. And then in the third and final part, we will examine the implications and stakes of these different presentations, that is, the French and Chinese perspectives on the ground and their implications. So let's talk about the influence or the performance of France. Jean-François Valette, for example, the former European Union ambassador to the Ivory Coast, was the European Union's ambassador to the Côte d'Ivoire in 2015. And during the conference he led on the theme of Europe and the Africa and the Ivory Coast, he said, quote, most of the major infrastructure projects carried out in the Côte d'Ivoire from the early days of independence until the end of the 20th century are the result of Ivoirian-European cooperation. This statement is clearly borne out on the ground in the Côte d'Ivoire. Indeed, when we find branches of major French companies that are heavily established in strategic sectors in the Ivory Coast, this is Bouygues, this is Bolloré and their telecommunications, or Ivory Coast Telecom, which is almost entirely controlled by France Telecom, and so on. But when we look at the specific area of infrastructure and closely examine the major projects undertaken or planned since 2010, despite the slowdown between 1990 and 2010, we see that many of these projects are financed by French entities, such as the French Development Agency, AFD. Examples include the third bridge of Abidjan, the Henri Conan-Médier Bridge, the installation of 11 metal bridges in rural areas, rehabilitation of the Oufoué-Boigny Bridge, the construction of the Abidjan Metro line.
La réalisation d'une ligne SOS de bus rapide et transit.
There was also the construction of an east-west line for a rapid bus line, which is now being built. So, more or less, all of the major projects were in the hands of Westerners, particularly the French, until the end of the 20th century. Furthermore, this is especially in the hands of Westerners, but especially the French, as I've demonstrated. And even up until 2013, there were over 600 French companies involved in such projects, compared to only 18 Chinese companies. However, what we currently see by looking at the agricultural landscape in Côte d'Ivoire since the late 1990s is that China is increasingly establishing its presence in the construction of major infrastructure projects. Specifically, from 1996 to 2024, we count at least 30 major projects completed, or even several projects financed and carried out by China, whether within a public-public, public-private, or private-private framework. So just to give a short list of some of the projects, you have the Abidjan Cultural Center, the Abidjan Bassam Highway, and the Subre hydroelectric dam. China has been undertaking numerous projects in Côte d'Ivoire since 1996, both financing and carrying them out. These projects encompass the electrical, hydraulic, road sectors, among others. We can also mention the project of a hydroelectric dam called Gribopoli, the project to improve drinking water supply to 12 cities, and the construction of a fourth bridge in Abidjan, which has already been completed. Other projects include the Biovea biomass power plant and the construction of a cocoa processing plant and a cocoa bean storage facility in Abidjan, just to name a few of the projects now being carried out by China. Moreover, there are subcontracting projects. Companies can access a large market and choose to subcontract with China. For us, this collaboration or subcontracting between the two partners demonstrates that the technology and expertise of Chinese construction companies are increasingly valued and integrated into development programs. But if China has managed to establish a presence and even secure contracts with its French partners, it shows that the Chinese companies have a strong presence in the Ivory Coast and are also carving out a niche for themselves alongside major French companies. And that shows, it illustrates the shift ongoing over the years. We presented two cases, France, which dominated until the end of the 20th century, and China, which is gaining ground now.
Il y a vraiment une montée en puissance de la Chine, même si les grands chantiers continuent d'être aux mains des entreprises françaises.
There is a very real rise in Chinese influence, even if major construction projects continue to be in the hands of French companies.
N'est pas sans conséquence, parce que forcément ça va susciter des critiques et autres. Et comme vous
also carving out a place.
Peut-être entendu souvent des gens dire par exemple que la Chine va endetter la Côte d'Ivoire, la Chine va exploite peut-être surexploite les ressources naturelles.
This has many implications because it will provoke criticism and other issues. You've probably heard people saying that the Ivory Coast is becoming indebted to China and that China is overexploiting natural resources. So I'd like to highlight these implications of this criticism has slowed China down a bit, even when it plans to do other things. I would just cite the criticisms of Bernard Kouchner and the French consulting firm BD Consultant, which highlight the harmful effects of the Chinese presence. But I won't go into detail because we don't have time for that. Just in conclusion, I would say that the presence of new donors such as the Chinese can help the rapid development of African states, particularly the Côte d'Ivoire, for infrastructure. However, the continued dominance of companies from the former colonial powers slows the progress of other businesses. This dominance, even if it's not openly discussed or emphasized enough, still exists. Compromises are made between companies, and this makes things more difficult. Tenders aren't as fair. Many contracts are awarded without competitive bidding.
Ce sont des défis à relever, ce sont des enjeux.
So these are challenges that have to be overcome, and solutions must be found in order to give everyone a fair chance on an equal footing. Therefore, I would say that the presence of new donors, especially the Chinese, can help the rapid development of African states in infrastructure. However, the control exerted by companies from the former metropolis is slowing the momentum, and therefore we need to review it. So I had to go a little bit, I went through this very quickly because I didn't have much time for my presentation. But maybe we can go into this a little bit more during the discussion. I'm online, so we can ask questions and discuss them. So thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup Filomène, qui normalement, je l'espère, est avec nous et qui pourra être là pour les questions-réponses. Donc la prochaine vidéo sera de Dora MUANDA, donc, qui est conseillère en réforme, innovation pédagogique et évaluation, et qui travaille au ministère de l'Éducation nationale et Nouvelle Citoyenneté de la République démocratique du Congo, qui va délivrer un message au nom de Madame la ministre, son Excellence Raïssa Malou, qui n'a pu être présent malheureusement, qui a dû partir pour un autre déplacement, qui n'a pas pu être là, donc sa secrétaire va nous lire son discours.
C'est Dora.
Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les ambassadeurs, distingués invités, chers participants, bonjour. C'est un honneur pour moi de m'adresser à vous au nom du ministère de l'Éducation nationale et de la Nouvelle Citoyenneté.
Distinguished guests, it's an honor for me to address you on behalf of the Ministry of National Education of the Democratic Republic of Congo and to convey the fraternal greetings of our minister. First of all, thank you to the Schiller Institute for organizing this international conference on Africa's position as a majority on the world stage and for initiating such a high-level reflection on emancipation and peace. This theme resonates deeply with our country's vision for education. For us in the Democratic Republic of Congo, education is the key to peace, dignity, and sustainable development. It is through education that we prepare citizens capable of building a peaceful, just, and united future for the Congo and for Africa as a whole. Let me describe a few educational reforms that I consider historic, which our country has been committed to since June 2024, based on the conviction that to transform the nation, we must first transform its education system. The shift we are making is based on an integrated approach that acts simultaneously on 4 levels: access, quality, governance, and resilience. The first step in this transformation was to consolidate our strategic foundation. Since 2016, the country has had what is known as a sectoral strategy for education and training. This document laid the foundations for an inclusive and equitable system. But the 5-year plan we developed for 2024 to 2029 has given these initial ambitions a new lease on life, setting out our action within a clear vision. It's inclusive, equitable, modern, and resilient education. We have 5 priorities: modernizing infrastructure and digital tools, strengthening teaching, training, and professionalization, revising school curricula, promoting responsible citizenship, and developing the digital and green skills necessary for the country's transition to a sustainable future. Strategy is the professionalization of the teaching profession, and with that in mind, the national policy for continuing education of secondary school teachers was adopted, and it enshrines continuing education as a right and a duty. This policy links training to career progression, harmonizes practices, and enhances the quality of learning at all levels. It makes teachers not only the pillars of the system, but also the primary agents of change. At the same time, our government has adopted a more holistic approach to education placing student well-being at the center of our policies. We want to increase student retention, even in the most disadvantaged areas. But we all know how difficult it is to stay focused on an empty stomach. That's why we have implemented the National School Food Strategy, which uses school meals as a lever for equity, health, and success. By promoting local production channels, we hope to connect schools to communities, learning to dignity, and nutrition to national productivity. But education must also be protected from crises. That's why our strategy now guarantees continuity of learning for children affected by conflict, disaster, or forced displacement. It provides for temporary learning spaces, psychosocial support, and preventive governance mechanisms so that no Congolese child is deprived of their right to learn, even in times of adversity. On the institutional level, a major reform has been the rationalization of management offices. This reform aims to make our administration more coherent, transparent, and efficient. For too long, the disorderly proliferation of local structures had led to duplication, delays, and wasted resources. Today, thanks to the streamlining, the creation and management of schools meet clear criteria of legality and viability. We have a new procedure manual that governs the creation and accreditation of public and private schools, ensuring that each institution is recognized, monitored, and supported in accordance with the school map and the country's real needs. This commitment to transparency has also resulted in a profound modernization of our assessment processes. The state examinations, a symbolic moment in the Congolese school system, has been completely reformed to enter the digital age. The introduction of artificial intelligence in the marking of exams and the issuance of secure e-diplomas via the Diploma.CD platform now guarantees rapid, fair, and tamper-proof assessments. Every Congolese diploma can now be authenticated online thanks to blockchain technology. This is a major step forward that strengthens the credibility of the DRC's educational system on the international stage. Finally, to guarantee every citizen's right to education, regardless of where they live, the DRC has institutionalized distance learning. This reform, adopted in last February, opens up new opportunities for students living in remote areas with disabilities or affected by crises. Digital platforms, educational radio and television programs, and printed workbooks so that everyone can learn, even without an internet connection. This is a deeply inclusive reform that reflects our desire to build a truly resilient and equitable system. These reforms are not merely technical initiatives. They form a coherent whole, an architecture of systemic transformation, where each policy reinforces the other, professionalizing teachers, feeding students, securing schools, digitizing assessments, and ensuring transparency in governance. Together, they constitute a Congolese educational model in the midst of a renaissance, a model that places people, trust, and responsibility at the heart of national development. Under the leadership of our president, Tshisekedi Tshilombo, the Congo reaffirms its condition that even in hardship, faced with the wounds of war and the fragility of peace, it is through education, knowledge, and creativity that our nature seeks to build lasting peace and a sustainable future. I leave you with the motto of our ministry. We are the national education system. We are preparing the future of our children. We are building the nation.
Donc maintenant, on va voir un autre aspect de la situation.
To see another aspect of the situation in the Congo, which is a bit more somber. So I will ask Zenobita to come to the podium to speak.
Bonsoir à tous. Bonsoir à tous. Je m'appelle Zenobita.
My name is Zenobita.
Je tiens avant tout d'abord de remercier
First, I want to thank the Schiller Institute to give me this opportunity to talk to you. I want to excuse myself. I'm not a specialist of war situation. I speak with my heart and with my guts because the situation hits me personally. The war in Congo, which is forgotten over the last 30 years, that our country is going into chaos, which is including, that hurts me since 30 years, since the United States decided to kick out Mobutu and to put Kagame at the head of Rwanda. We're going down and with an unspeakable silence on these crimes. We're talking about millions of people. My mother has been killed in front of me. My father also has been killed. He was a military man. He was fighting these atrocities which were imposed by the Western nations in the name of democracy and human rights, which is blind on the crimes done by Kagame and Museveni in Uganda. I speak in front of you. I see many young people. I want to talk to everybody, to you, the young generation. We have to engage ourselves, commit ourselves. We have a responsibility. We have a mission. As Fanon said, everybody should be ready to really commit itself to a mission. And we have to stop this war which is on our doors. Everybody should wake up about what's going on in Congo, but also in Sudan, in Palestine, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It doesn't happen only to others. I'm here since the last 5 years. Over the last 30 years, I see my country falling and going down. The public opinion of the West should support the Congolese people. It has to stop. This war has destroyed my life and my family. It is time.
Il n'est pas question de choisir un camp ou de prendre position.
One has not to take position in front of the one or the other, but to unite all in peace and dialogue. The world has to do it for peace and justice. This war doesn't bring anything for us, the little people. The imperialist capitalist system, which wants chaos in the world, inflicts suffering. I don't think that France or other countries, when they impose war in other countries, it is time that the people of the United States or France get together with the so-called third world, the people, to stop this imperialist and capitalist system, because the people of the world, especially the youth,
Parce que moi, ça va faire des années que je vis et je vécu dans cette guerre.
I'm living with this for years. I have no more hope. I'm still a woman. Can I reconstruct myself? Can I have children in a world with wars, inequalities, and injustice? On the other side, I see people which are supporting the war parties. We have to change. We have to choose the side of justice and peace and share together. I remain optimist, and I'm very militant about peace because I'm directly hurted by this. This war has stolen my grandmother.
Pour vous dire combien la guerre est violente.
Will never feel loved. If you're left wing or right wing, from the west or the east, we have to speak the same language.
Parce que personne ne le fera à notre place. Ceux qui organisent ces guerres dans le monde,
this peace. Nobody will do it in our place. Those who do the war, they do it for their interest, for their money. We have to get together, all of us, and to tell and organize the public opinion. These are the
Depuis des siècles, ça n'a pas commencé aujourd'hui. Il était temps que l'opinion publique du monde entier, de l'Occident, de se mettre ensemble et de dire stop à votre système de guerre, à votre système de violence, de pillage et d'exploitation.
and violence and looting, because that's the reason why this war is being destroyed. Palestine is everywhere in the world.
De la paix et de la justice, parce que c'est possible. Je vous remercie.
Thank you.
Merci Zenobita. Donc on va continuer avec une intervention à nouveau par vidéo. On aura l'occasion de pouvoir discuter un petit peu plus
video intervention. We will be able to have questions afterwards. Now it will be Chekaraou, Halidou, Namaiwa. It's a young Pan-Africanist of Niger from the three countries, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, which have liberated themselves from the neo-colonial heritage. They are discussing to have a new financial instruments to operate together, and they are fighting in incredibly difficult conditions. You know that Niger is the one before the last developed country of the world. It's only 15% of the population, only 15% has access to electricity. So they're fighting in very difficult conditions, but full of hope, full of hope.
Et l'impérialisme qu'a dénoncé Zenobita. Donc on lui donne la parole.
Everything what Zenobita told us about.
Mon nom est Chekaraou Halidou Namaiwa.
Good evening. My name is Chekaraou Halidou Namaiwa.
La thématique qui nous réunit.
I'm a young Pan-Africanist from Niger. The theme that brings us together today concerning the mobilization of young people for the future of Africa, I believe, is a quality question, but also a question of an ongoing commitment on the part of African youth. A permanent commitment when we know how African youth mobilized against colonialization and how it was this same youth that mobilized at the time in the 1960s to defend independence
Alors, on est en droit de se poser des questions. Pourquoi?
Right to ask ourselves why, 65 years later, this patriotic spirit continues to grow among African youth. The answer is quite simple. Because African youth are aware that their survival depends on the future of the African continent. The youth are aware that without peace and prosperity on the African continent, they will cease to exist. So, aware of all these challenges, many obstacles of today of the continent.
Les questions liées à l'insécurité.
Issues of insecurity. That no development is possible without a climate of peace and understanding.
Lorsque l'OTAN a décidé d'envahir la Libye.
Parallel to take you back to 2011 when NATO decided to invade Libya.
Dans le cadre de leur projet funèbre du printemps arabe. Alors, nos pays du Sahel.
They decided to destroy this exemplary country as part of their Arab Spring project. So, for our countries in the Sahel, I would say that Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali paid the price.
Alors, c'est que la jeunesse ne comprenne pas.
Today. But what young people do not understand is why partners with significant resources are here on our soil, but the security issues, unfortunately, are only growing. So young people are asking questions about that. And that's what prompted, what pushed young people at one point, at a certain point, to ask our authorities to simply tell the French military bases that were in our countries that it was time to pack their bags, especially since we know that in Niger, these French military bases had arrived without even the authorization of the National Assembly. Unfortunately, at the time, many civil society actors who were at the forefront of these struggles ended up in prison. So, what many people today don't understand, especially in the West, is why African and Sahelian youth defend or continue to support the military leaders of our countries. The answer is quite simple. Because these military leaders, whether in Niger, Burkina Faso, or Mali, are soldiers who share the same convictions as African youth and who are working toward the same goals as African youth.
Ce que veut la jeunesse africaine, ça finit comme ça. Désolé, il y a eu un petit problème au moment de la vidéo.
Abruptly, but that was the end of the video. I think you understood the content of the message, and he will be with us during the question and answer period. If the internet connection works, that's already always problematic in Niger.
C'est Monsieur Mariano Nguema,
Mr. Mariano Nguema ESONO MEDJA, who is a professor of international relations in the National University of Equatorial Guinea.
Buenos días, bonjour. Queridos asistentes a este foro de París, antes de todo quisiera agradecer enormemente a la organización del Instituto Schiller por hacer posible este encuentro. Muchos de nosotros nos hubiera gustado trasladarnos hasta París, pero desgraciadamente por cuestiones de visado no ha sido posible. Es ahí donde precisamente entran las ventajas de la tecnología, de acercarnos y hacer todo lo posible para que, aun cuando no estuviéramos presencialmente, al menos
at least the technology has allowed us to participate this way and to participate in this effort by the Schiller Institute. I will share with you this morning my reflections on this forum on peace and emancipation. The simplest question
poder abordar aquí en París deben llevarnos a hacer muchísimas preguntas.
The reason that we are assembled here in Paris should lead us to an understanding of common sense. If there is no understanding in Africa, there will be, if there is no peace in Africa, there will be no peace anywhere, because Africans will have to migrate and flee. As a university professor, I feel that universities have an important role in these issues, because universities are, in fact, who will be preparing the human resources. Good morning from Malabo. My name is Mariano Nguema. As you know, I would have liked to participate in this conference in Paris. Still, thanks to technology, we cannot be personally present. I would like to thank the Paris Schiller Institute and all of that team that has organized this encounter, so that we can share these days to share experiences and reflect a little on the situation of Africa, most especially in terms of peace and emancipation. The simplest question to ask ourselves today, insignificant perhaps for many, maybe, is it so difficult to live in peace? Humanity is going through a globalization process. I often describe this as a phenomenon in which everything affects everybody, and everybody is involved in everything. To the question whether it is difficult to live in peace, the answer is equally simple. No, it is not difficult to live in peace. If so, let's ask, why is it not possible to live in peace? The answer, again, is simple: because we don't believe in peace, or many don't believe in peace. As a consequence of this absence of a culture of peace, draws us into situations of conflict as the world experiences today. This is where the responsibility of Africa as a whole comes in, to make peace and emancipation an effective, vital reality. Speaking of Africa, I began by saying that globalization knows no borders. Global phenomena are universal, even though their effects may be different from one place to another. But when it comes to Africa, there can be no doubt that many who think of African issues mistakenly don't think of it as a collective whole, but as something isolated, as a single country, not without, mindless of the great diversion that flows from the heart of Africa. In terms of population, Africa is the second most populated continent after Asia. This is very important, because when we speak of peace and emancipation in Africa, this needs to reach our consciences. No one should doubt that Africa needs to play a fundamental role today. It is, we know of the obstacles to development that hold Africa back, its internal problems, the need for good government, and institutions that are transparent and accessible to citizens. If we add to this the armed conflicts that cause insecurity for many, ethnic problems of one sort or another, the desperation of some for better living conditions, hunger, poverty, corruption. To summarize, in many places in Africa, basic human needs are not covered. So it is no wonder that Africans need to flee, to leave, to find healthy environments where they can truly live in peace and emancipate themselves? If so, let's ask ourselves then, what's wrong with the organization that we've created, that we have been joining? Do they not take these issues into account? And so many other questions we could ask. If the answers to these questions are not positive, well, then we must assume that the ideals are good, but we must work harder to attain them. This means that both peace and emancipation that we wish for Africa for the moment are nothing more than a wish. If so, as we must assume that we are all part of one world, it is high time to take a look at our brothers from the global south who have also traveled these roads decades ago. We must ask, what have they done? How have they done it? To answer these questions, we should reach out to our brothers in other continents, Asia, America, Europe. We should all hold hands and approach these brothers with the courage and humility to learn from them about the values that we all share, and especially to find solutions to these problems, and that will not be, so that it is no longer utopia. I would like to emphasize that the need for Africa to embrace the global South with conviction and a commitment to work together. So I would like to address now the role that universities must play. As a professional of international relations at the National University of Equatorial Guinea, I believe we have a responsibility. We must raise critical awareness of the meaning of life for human beings in society. Students need to be educated not just on technical matters, but also in human values, so that basic issues we face day after day can be addressed with a sense of humanity, knowing full well that in today's circumstances, they are no longer problems of peace and emancipation in Africa alone, but globally, because if we do not bring peace and emancipation to Africa, there will no be peace anywhere else. So, as we say in Equatorial Guinea, humans are a reflection of what they give. If we educate our youth in the values of peace, emancipation, and solidarity, not only Africa, but the whole world would be at peace, and coexistence among people will be possible. What is needed is to believe in it, work for it, educate in it, and in short, to achieve our goals in a world in which peaceful coexistence and respect for human beings are the highest priority. We must strive, each one of us, from our respective areas of competence, to make these three essential reality: how to be a person, how to be in society, and perhaps the most important thing on today is the implementation of social policies that will make it possible for Africans not merely to live in peace, but also truly emancipate, because otherwise we will have difficulties. But these are difficulties that we can overcome and go beyond. I want to thank you very sincerely for this opportunity to share views, and I hope that through these conversations we can achieve a better world, because these are not issues for Africa alone, but for the entire world. And the issues of the world are issues for all of us. And for this, I would like to thank the Schiller Institute. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, je ne sais pas s'il sera avec nous dans la période de questions-réponses.
So thank you to him.
During the Q&A session, I don't know yet. On ne sait pas encore.
During the discussion.
Voilà. Donc, merci à vous. Donc, dernière intervenante. On va élargir, parce qu'on a évidemment beaucoup d'invités qui venaient du continent africain, et on avait
many people from African countries. We could not have everybody, but we try to have from different countries. So now we're going to have also, but this is about Global South,
And so it also it's why we have now Odile MOJON, which is candidate in France for France abroad from a big part of Africa and also the Middle East. It's the day after the name of our presentation.
Oh. I will indeed talk about the day after. The evidence, the proof of the genocide committed by Israel in Gaza is no longer in doubt. Besides the thousands of testimonies, stories, video recordings, audio, pictures, which documented the slightest ambiguity, the materiality of the facts has also been confirmed by the International Criminal Court, which has issued arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant for crimes against humanity, as well as by the International Court of Justice and the International Commission of Inquiry independent of the UN, the latter having concluded that Israel's actions against the Palestinian population of Gaza met the legal definition of genocide on 4 of 5 articles. If this was not already being taken in account by these legal bodies, the complicity and active support of Western countries, both politically through their inaction and financially and technologically, will owe a debt to the Western world. At this moment, it's being examined, including by Ireland and Spain. The West has reverted to its colonial vice based on the tradition of sordid geopolitical calculations and the law of the strongest, the inevitable corollary of which is war, perpetual war. Celso Amorim, advisor to President Lula da Silva, said a few days ago in an interview to O Globo, "Peace is indivisible." He spoke of the danger of war threatening Venezuela, saying that one cannot imagine that there is peace in Ukraine and at the same time a war of some kind of attack in South America. All is connected, all contaminates each other. That's the right word, contaminate, like the current contamination of minds in an invaded society through a culture of war, and we can no longer conceive of the other except as friend or enemy. One only needs to look at the degradation of public debate under the influence of the media and more broadly of a culture of violence, even in relationships among people. It's a symptom of the division into communities foreign to one another and the disintegration of the desire to live together. At its extreme, this rejection can take the clinical form of apartheid, or the illusion that my existence can only be achieved through the elimination of the other. This is what we see in Gaza. The fact that the ICG was seized at the end of 2023 by South Africa was particularly important. Israel was called to act and stop any act of genocide, warned on a real and imminent risk of harm irreparable to the Palestinians, and urged to ensure the delivery of humanitarian aid. However, in its response, July 19, 2024, the ICG ruled not only that the occupation of Palestine by Israel was illegal, but that the Israeli state was pursuing a policy of apartheid. The ICG added that Israel has to cease its activities of colonization, withdraw its settlers, and grant full reparations to Palestinians. The ICG's advisory opinion was confirmed by the UN by a resolution at the General Assembly of the UN, asking that Israel immediately ends its illegal presence in the occupied Palestinian territory. This establishes the link between South Africa and Gaza. By taking the initiative of this referral under the impetus of Naledi Pandor, then Minister of International Relations, to free, to reconnect South Africa with the historical momentum that enabled it to free itself from apartheid. In short, this process began with the resistance led by the anti-apartheid movement, including the African National Congress of Nelson Mandela around 1985, when Peter Botha regime was facing an economic crisis and growing dissent. Secret contacts between the government and the ANC in exile, in particular Nelson Mandela, still in jail, were established. In 1999, a policy of reforms was initiated that led to the gradual abolition of apartheid by the new president, Frédéric de Klerk. On February 11, 1990, Nelson Mandela was released after 27 years in jail. A few days earlier, the anti-apartheid movement and the South African Communist Party, banned since the 1960s, was legalized and the main laws of apartheid repealed. Then a convention for a democratic South Africa was established to initiate negotiations between the government and political parties. In April 1994, the first free and multiracial elections in South Africa resulted in the victory of the ANC, with Nelson Mandela elected president. A new constitution was adopted and a commission of reconciliation put in place. Meanwhile, in 1993, Mandela and de Klerk were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their role in the peaceful transition. This time, a real merited Peace Prize. As things stand, the transition currently envisaged for Gaza, following the ceasefire of October 10th, takes a decision, a direction diametrically opposed to what happened in South Africa. Because to make peace, you not only need to desire it, one has to be two parties. It comes to Donald Trump, given Israel's absolute denial of the Palestinian reality, by opening the door by including the Palestinians in the ceasefire negotiations. He did not do so. Worse, in his 20-point plan, he proposed that Gaza be placed under the temporary transitional authority of a technocratic and apolitical Palestinian committee within an institution called the Gaza International Transition Authority, GITA. The latter could be chaired by the infamous Tony Blair. Well, even at this stage, his name does not appear in the draft on the confidential plan leaked by Haaretz. On the other hand, the names of some of the billionaires tipped to lead the board of directors have been revealed. For example, Mark Rowan, a billionaire who owns one of the largest private equity firms in the United States, Naguib Sawiris, an Egyptian billionaire in the telecom sector, and Arieh Lightstone, executive director of the Abraham Accords Peace Institute. This is not surprising that they all align on the goals of the Israeli government. Lightstone stands out for his role in the creation of the very controversial Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which was put in charge of bringing humanitarian aid and did it in terrible, horrific, monstrous conditions.
Le fait que la cessation que même la cessation des bombardements contre Gaza suite à l'entrée en vigueur du cessez-le-feu et qui permettrait de donner un semblant de crédibilité
halt in bombings
risque
of
de n'être
Gaza
qu'un souvenir si les violations répétées du
to
cessez-le-feu
leave
par Israël
place for the
continuent,
Trump peace
en ayant
plan
provoqué la mort de quelques 200 et plus Palestiniens depuis le 10 octobre,
is very
Israël
fragile.
a montré, prouvé
200
clairement
Palestinians have
qu'il n'avait
been
aucune intention de
detained
mettre
since
fin
October
au
10.
génocide. Alors,
Israel
dans un tel
has
contexte,
shown no
qu'est-ce qui
sign
reste?
of
Alors,
any
il y a
intention to
quelque chose
putting
qui
an end
reste,
to
qui est absolument
genocide. So what's
fondamental,
left? The reality is that today
qui peut être la clé en réalité, c'est que la paix aujourd'hui est
the
directement
key
conditionnée
of
à la
peace is
libération
directly
de
conditional upon the
Mandela
release
palestinien,
of the
Marwan
Palestinian
Barghouti,
Mandela,
détenu depuis
named
23 ans
Marwan
dans les prisons
Barghouti,
israéliennes.
since 22
Je
years
reprends
in
ici ce qu'a
Israeli
dit Le Monde tout
prisons.
récemment dans un article quand
What
ils ont présenté,
Le Monde did an
représenté,
article on November the 2nd,
emprisonné par
that
Israël depuis 2002.
imprisoned by
Il est
Israel
ainsi
since
épargné par le
2002,
discrédit qui frappe les
Barghouti
dirigeants palestiniens de tous
is
bords au
spared
point
by the
d'être surnommé
disrepute
le Mandela
that affect
palestinien.
leaders,
Partisan de longue
Palestinian
date
leaders
de la
of all
solution à deux
stripes,
États,
to the
il
point
est
of being
capable
nicknamed
de
the
faire de son
Palestinian
aura
Mandela.
militante
A long-time
de
supporter of a
l'imposer aussi
two-state
bien aux
solution, he is
islamistes et
able,
du
due to
Hamas
his
qu'aux
military
autres
aura,
factions.
to impose it on both
Pilier du
the
Fatah de
Hamas
l'Organisation de
Islamists
libération de la Palestine
as well
et
as on other
incarcéré
factions,
lorsque
a
Yasser
pillar of
Arafat
Fatah
en
and the
était encore le
Palestinian
chef,
Liberation
il
Organization,
pourrait
but
restaurer la
imprisoned
crédibilité de ces
when
deux mouvements,
Arafat,
vidés de leur substance par
if he
Mahmoud
were still the
Abbas,
leader, he could restore
actuel
the
président de la
credibility of
Genève,
these two movements,
et c'est bel et
which
bien pour
have
cela que
been
Netanyahou a
emptied of their
refusé de libérer
substance.
Barghouti dans le cadre des échanges avec le Hamas, fermant ainsi cette horizon politique que le plan Trump appelle pourtant de ses voeux. Donc, le monde voit bien la contradiction
Le monde sees the contradiction
à cet état des choses.
the refusal of Israel to release Barghouti creates the dead end of the situation
Alors,
which
ça
have
pose
to
la
be
question
solved.
de
That
réfléchir au jour
puts the
d'après.
question on what will be done the day after.
Tout récemment dans un événement à Paris auquel
I
j'assistais au
was
milieu d'un
recently in an
public de
event in
plusieurs
Paris
milliers
where
de
there were
personnes.
several thousands
Et
of
donc, il y avait deux
people.
femmes
There were
journalistes,
two
l'une
female
palestinienne
journalists,
et
a
l'autre
Palestinian
israélienne, qui ont
one
été
and an
invitées
Israeli
à prendre la
woman
parole.
journalists were
Et
invited
quand
to
la
speak.
journaliste
When the
israélienne s'est
Israeli
exprimée,
journalist
elle
spoke,
a immédiatement
she
posé la
immediately
question du
asked the
jour
question of the
d'après,
day,
de ce qui se passera une fois que le
what will
génocide
happen
sera terminé,
once the
puisqu'il
genocide
s'achèvera nécessairement un jour. De quelle
will be
manière?
finished,
On
will
ne
be
sait pas.
finishing.
Elle a notamment
Then
évoqué l'inévitable tout autant
she
qu'indispensable
spoke
travail
about
de
the
soul
inevitable
searching.
work of
Alors la
soul
traduction
searching.
française ça se traduit par introspection.
In
Je
French, they translate this
préfère
as introspection.
ce que sous-tend
I prefer
le terme en anglais
the English
de
term,
recherche dans son âme
looking
d'une certaine manière,
in one's soul,
et qui est vraiment ce à quoi vont être confrontés. Elle parlait des Israéliens et ils sont déjà confrontés. La question
the Israelis will be confronted with this, and they are already, and the entire Western world is already confronted with this.
Et donc, justement, je pense qu'il y a plusieurs éléments qui indiquent que nous
Several
vivons
elements
aujourd'hui
show
de ce
that
jour
there is
d'après.
a kind of
Et très
shift
légitimement,
towards
les
the
premières
day
lueurs en sont
after.
visibles là où le soutien historique à la politique israélienne a été le plus fort,
And
aux
it
États-Unis.
can be seen in the
Je vais
United
revenir un
States.
petit peu sur ce que Diane a déjà développé ce
And I
matin
will
et qui me paraît très
to
important.
come back to what Diana developed this
Récemment, il y a eu
morning.
plusieurs sondages
Recently, there have been polls in the United States
que
which
pour
show that
60% des Américains,
60% of
Israël commet un
Americans,
génocide à Gaza.
Israel is committing a
Il y a eu un
genocide.
autre sondage, cette fois-ci ciblant
There's
la
another
population
poll
juive en tant que telle, réalisé par le Washington Post,
done by the
et qui
Washington
montre que
Post
61%
showed that
des Juifs pensent
61%
qu'Israël
of the
commet des crimes de
American
guerre,
Jews
et
believe that
40%
Israel is
même
doing
d'entre
war
eux
crimes,
qui pensent qu'il
and
commet un génocide,
40%
ce qui
that
est
they
évidemment
commit
un
a
développement
genocide.
extrêmement
This
fort.
is among the
En d'autres
American
termes,
Jews.
le
In
soutien
other
à la
terms,
politique
the
pro-israélienne
US
des
support
États-Unis
for
est en train de
Israel
s'effondrer.
is
L'autre
collapsing.
élément, évidemment,
The
c'est
other
l'élection
element
de Zoran
of
Mondani
the
à New
other
York,
element,
dont
of course, is the
effectivement on ne sait
election
pas
of
ce que ça va donner.
Mandani in New
Mais ce qui
York,
est important là-dedans, c'est
thanks
le
in particular to
processus,
the
et
youth
notamment
vote
qu'il a
in a
été
city where
élu
the
grâce au
proportion of
vote des
Jews
jeunes
is
dans une
very high,
ville où la
which
proportion
of
de la
course means
population juive
that
est
many
extrêmement
young
importante.
young Jews
par la force des choses que
voted for
de
him.
nombreux juifs jeunes, par ailleurs, ont voté pour lui. Donc les implications à long
So
terme
the
pour Israël
long-term implications for Israel and the world are striking. Combined with the importance of
aux quatre coins du monde, nous assistons
the mobilizations
à
against genocide
changement
in
radical
all
dans ce qui
corners of the
pourrait
world
s'apparenter à une forme
show
mondiale
there's the emergence of a factor
politique,
of
si je peux
radical
dire,
change,
débouchant sur
a
une
form
volonté
of a global
réfléchie
form of
d'action. Parce que
political
les gens
introspection
qui ont changé,
leading to
ils
a
ont changé pas
considered
comme ça
desire for
à cause de l'air
action.
du temps.
In this sense,
Ils ont
the chorus
changé
of
parce
patriots and
qu'ils ont vu
citizens
ce qui
of
se
the
passait
world
sur place, parce
entered
qu'ils
the
ont vu, parce
stage in
qu'ils
the
ont fait
name
l'effort
of what
d'aller à
are fundamental
contre-courant
principles of humanity.
de tout
It
ce que
is in this
disaient les
context
médias,
that
et ça
despite
donne
all
une
the obstacles,
qualité, je
the
dirais,
release
de
of
mobilisation qui est
Barghouti
quand même très
becomes
différente. Et je pense qu'en ce sens-là, le cœur des patriotes et citoyens
the
du monde
heart and citizens
est
of the
entré
world
sur scène, sur la scène
has
mondiale,
entered
au
on
nom de ce qu'il y
stage
a de principes
in the
fondamentaux
name
de
of
l'humanité.
the fundamental
Ça ne veut pas
principles
dire que
of
la bataille soit
humanity.
gagnée,
That
il
doesn't
s'en faut
mean
de
we have
beaucoup.
won the battle.
Mais en tout cas, ce qui est clair, c'est
What
que
is
dans un tel contexte,
clear is that
et
in
en
that
dépit de
context,
tous les blocages,
despite all the
la
obstacles,
libération d'Amarwan
the release of
Barghouti
Marwan
devient
Barghouti
possible.
becomes
La
possible,
solution à deux États
and the
est
two-state solution
effectivement envisageable de manière
can
concrète,
be
avec, pour
implemented,
donner corps à ce
giving
processus,
substance to
le
this
plan
process
Oasis de
with
Lyndon
the
LaRouche,
Lyndon LaRouche's Oasis plan,
qu'il avait
which, let us
initié en
recall,
1975
has
après
been
des
proposed
discussions avec
in
des représentants du
1975,
prince irakien et
proposed as a
des
dialogue
représentants
between him and
israéliens. Et
Iraqi
donc
and Israeli
ce plan
representative. That plan
avait été proposé déjà au moment où il y avait les accords
had been
d'Oslo.
proposed
Et là, on se retrouve
in part
de nouveau dans un
during the
type de moment
Oslo
où ce
negotiations,
genre de
and we
choses est
find ourselves
envisageable.
back in a
Et donc,
situation where this
je
becomes
conclurai en
a
disant
realistic perspective.
on a
But
une
I want to
excellente
conclude.
nouvelle,
The
c'est
excellent
notre
news is
engagement,
that this is our commitment,
réfléchi et dûment informé des
the
citoyens
thoughtful
qui
and
jouent
duly informed
qui
commitment
joue et
of
qui jouera
citizens
le premier rôle
that will
pour
play the
concrétiser
leading
la
role
paix.
in bringing
Merci beaucoup.
about peace. Thanks.
Merci beaucoup, Odile.
Thank you,
Donc, on va
Odile.
passer à la période
Now
de questions-réponses.
we will
Alors, il y a
enter the
beaucoup de choses qui ont été
questions
dites
and answers
de
period.
l'Afrique du
Many
Sud, de
things
Côte
have been
d'Ivoire,
said.
du Niger, de Guinée
Ivory Coast,
équatoriale,
South Africa,
du Moyen-Orient, de la
Equatorial
République
Guinea,
démocratique
Middle
du
East,
Congo.
Republic of Congo.
Donc, beaucoup de sujets à traiter. On
Many,
va
many,
commencer
many
par prendre des
subjects.
questions
We
de
will
la salle. Il y
take
aura
questions
peut-être
from the room.
nos invités de Côte d'Ivoire, de Guinée équatoriale et du Niger qui vont probablement répondre. Si vous avez des questions spécifiques, on va essayer de les connecter.
Some of the panelists will be able to intervene by Zoom and answer your questions. Go ahead.
Madame. Ah, ok. Pardon. Il y a eu... Oui.
Hello. Good afternoon. My name is Carla, and I was very moved by our Congolese speaker. I just wanted to ask specifically, how do you feel that the American, or rather Western citizenry, hasn't been putting enough pressure on our governments to better enforce the rule of law, the rule of justice that we would need to see to better respect you as another person of the world, as to better respect the Congo, and how we would be able to, what methods do you think that we have yet to use to put pressure on our countries?
Sorry, can you speak louder because we cannot hear from here?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
what methods do you think that...
Please, I'm sorry, but she needs to have the translation in French, so if someone
okay.
can... okay.
Because that was...
Can you repeat, please?
What methods do you think the Western citizenry of France and America have not been using to better pressure their governments to enforce justice for the Congo and to keep our Western companies from extracting and exploiting the Congo in the ways that we have? And how do you think that once we are able to undo the violence that we have started, we could lend a hand and lend a helping hand, or start to create a partnership with our engineers, with our tradesmen, and with the work that needs to be done to begin to rebuild and create health and wealth for the people of the Congo?
Okay. La question c'est comment tu expliques que les citoyens en Europe, etc., ne soutiennent pas ta cause pour le combat justement RDC, et qu'on laisse les compagnies minières continuer à exploiter des choses comme ça, et comment on peut créer un mouvement pour que tu sois soutenu, la justice l'a fait comme tu l'as défendu dans les citoyens occidentaux?
Who didn't have the translation.
En fait, pour commencer, il faut déjà, parce qu'il faut savoir qu'il y a l'omerta. Il y a l'omerta concernant on ne parle pas assez de ce qui
There's been an omerta in the Western media.
Donc, je pense que la première des choses à faire, c'est
So I think the first thing to be done
voilà pourquoi nous on essaye de médiatiser ce qui se passe dans notre pays.
is to mediatize what's been going on through the social media, social networks, and so on, so that our voice will be heard and that we can bring hope and that we can appeal to intervene in the Democratic Republic of Congo. What's happening in the Congo are ethnic and religious is what is being told, but that's not true. But it's not only internal conflicts that are going on, but there is it's also due to the occupation and the looting of resources by foreign powers. And that's why we need international solidarity so that everyone is interested in this conflict and seeing it end. It's enough for the moment to talk about it and to mobilize around you so that something will be done internationally.
Donc, s'il y a d'autres questions, Madame, non, il y avait une question ici. Voilà.
Le micro marche. Bon. Donc, je me présente. Je m'appelle Monika Karbowska. Je suis une militante communiste.
I'm a communist militant. I'm French and Polish, so thank you for inviting me to this very interesting conference. One remark and one question. The question is for Mrs. Filomène.
Et aussi pour Monsieur Chekaraou, Halidou.
And also for Mr. Chekaraou, Halidou. I don't know if they can, if they're on right now. I went to Nigeria in 2017 avec a structure called the Development Aid, which is made up of hundreds of associations and civil society who are in favor of sovereignty for Niger. And we talked a lot already at the time about how these natural resources could be taken over by a sovereign country. We were also very struck by what it meant to live without electricity, which we were able to live through. So my question is there an alliance between the Sahel countries and this famous project in the Ivory Coast, which Mrs. Nguema spoke about? Are these infrastructures being built together, although these countries are in two different camps, one could say, or they're on two different sides? In the Sahel countries, sovereign, and the remark from Mrs. Seplarouche, thank you for talking about the Westphalian Treaty, which ended wars in Europe and introduced the notion of nation states. Why not organize now? Why not organize an international forum for peace in Germany so that all sovereignist action activists, there are a lot of us, I have a lot of contacts, and we could launch this kind of movement, and Germany would be a perfect place to do it from.
Normalement, on a les deux personnes du Niger et de Côte d'Ivoire qui sont présents et qui sont peut-être en audio simplement. On va donner la parole d'abord à la Côte d'Ivoire.
African guests are available, maybe only by audio, but let's see if we can get them.
Le Niger, Niger, the Pan-African. We will try to have them.
We'll try to get them, but for the moment it doesn't work. So maybe Helga could answer first of all.
Have a new international conference in Westphalia with all the sovereignists of Europe defending what we have discussed today. Maybe you want to react to that, please.
Thank you very much. I think this is a fantastic idea, very much needed because, I think that we have reached a point where the injustice and the crimes have become intolerable. And that is, you have the revolt of conscience in waves. And then it goes down again and then it rises up again. The first election of President Trump was part of such a wave where you had revolts in the Yellow Vests in France, you had the rejection of the change of the constitution in Italy, and you had similar opposition. But then, it fell down again. But now I think we have a situation where the worldwide uproar about what happened, because what happened in Gaza is not just what happened to the Palestinians. I mean, they are obviously the most immediate victims who have been killed, massacred. I can only imagine the horror to be run back and forth under the shooting, the collapsing of the walls. The barbarism which has been portrayed has reached a point which I think, I'm not belittling what the Nazis did, but what the Nazis did was not in the TV in every household around the world. And the fact that the international community was so long unable to do anything about it, I think it has not only created a stain on the conscience of all of humanity, but it is something, which puts into very question our ability to survive. Because if we cannot remedy an absolute atrocity like that, we are, losing our humanity. And that's what many people are reacting against. I think what happened in New York with the Bamdani, whatever he turns out to be, there are different theories. We have to test it, because we have to see, is he like Bernie Sanders, where many people had hopes, but he turned out to be a complete disappointment. Now Trump is competing to become the biggest disappointment. So it's, but I think we have reached a point where we need mass movements, and therefore I welcome your proposal, because, in a certain sense, it would be so easy to remedy the whole situation in Africa, in Gaza, in Haiti, if there would be the political will to implement what would be feasible. We published in 2014 this program, the new Silk Road becomes the world land bridge. This is a blueprint for, the industrialization of Africa, of Latin America, of Asia, connecting all continents through tunnels and bridges. And, the Chinese could do most of that in 2 years. The Germans probably need 100 years, you know. So I don't know. I still want the Germans to be involved, but don't expect too. I'm kidding. I'm obviously, you know, I'm very frustrated about what's going on in Germany. But I think this idea to create a mass movement, also in Africa, you know, because I think if you had, and this is in part an answer to the professor who spoke from Equatorial Guinea, I mean, we have to create youth movements everywhere to demand this conception of the coincidence of opposite. I mean, the good thing is when you are young, you know, I mean, you are not yet deformed most of the time. I mean, as people get older, you know, the ability to improve gets sometimes less, not for everybody, but for most people. Young people have one big advantage, that they, you know, they're here, it's their future, it's their right to demand changes. So I think we should in earnest think about connecting youth movements all over the world, fighting for the idea of a new world economic order, an end to this incredible, I mean, it's perverse and absurd that some of the billionaires now want to become trillionaires. You know, no, I mean, that's a serious discussion. They think they have not accumulated enough money and power, so they want to become trillionaires. So I think we have to have a mass movement and the ability to create a just new world economic order where every country can fulfill its potential in cooperation with all other countries. It's not a dream, you know, it is a necessity. It's the normal way how people should relate to each other. So I can only full-heartedly, we should probably talk afterwards and make concrete plans because I'm fully for it.
Dankeschön, Helga. So you'll discuss. Alors normalement, on va pouvoir entendre notre ami du Niger, si je ne me trompe pas, ou de Côte d'Ivoire. On leur donne la parole. C'est compliqué. Oui, alors si les gens au Niger ou en Côte d'Ivoire peuvent nous entendre, on les entend, ils peuvent s'exprimer.
Ok. Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Vous m'entendez? Ok, d'accord. Si la salle m'entend, je voudrais encore une fois dire merci pour l'occasion que vous donnez, vous permettez en tout cas de se prononcer sur ces questions, comme je l'ai dit. Mais avant de revenir à la question de la dame, je voudrais préciser quand même que dans ma présentation, il y a eu deux petites fautes qui se sont glissées. Au niveau de l'approche, je parlais de l'approche
Thank
quantitative,
you
alors
all.
que je voulais parler de l'approche
I
qualitative.
want to say
Donc, c'est
that
deux
I wanted
erreurs. Et aussi,
to
au niveau des travaux que
say
j'ai
that I was
cités,
speaking of a qualitative
il y
approach.
a le barrage de Bouy,
And
c'est au
there is
Ghana.
a
Et
dam,
en Côte
Bui,
d'Ivoire, c'est plutôt le barrage de Soubré.
Bui
Donc, c'est de Soubré que je voulais
Dam.
parler parce que
I wanted
je
to speak
travaille
about
beaucoup sur
Subri.
les deux territoires, le Ghana et
I
la
work
Côte
on the
d'Ivoire. Donc, du coup,
two
dernièrement,
places.
j'ai fait
I
beaucoup de
work,
lectures sur le Ghana.
so
Ça
I have
fait que,
many
en
things about
parlant,
Ghana,
ça s'est
where
glissé par
about what
inadvertance, mais c'est plutôt le
I
barrage
work.
hydroélectrique de Soubré dont je voulais parler.
I wanted to speak
OK,
about
pour
the
revenir à
dam
la
of Subwe.
question qui
To
m'a
go
été
back,
posée. Je ne sais pas si j'ai bien noté, mais la dame elle m'a demandé la liaison entre l'Alliance du Sahel et les différents projets qui se
there is a
réalisent en
link
Côte d'Ivoire
between
avec
the Sahel Alliance
les
and
envoyés
the
occidentaux
projects which
sont
are
encore
happening
plus
in
présents en Côte
Côte
d'Ivoire, si
d'Ivoire.
j'ai bien pris. Ok, d'accord. Donc, pour commencer d'abord, pour parler de l'Alliance du Sahel, la Côte d'Ivoire
I
déjà
want
ne
to
fait
speak
pas
of the
partie de
Sahel
l'Alliance, puisque
Alliance.
l'Alliance
Côte
concerne
d'Ivoire is not
notamment le
about
Mali, le
Alliance
Burkina et le
du
Niger.
Sahel,
Donc, on va appeler AES.
Mali, Burkina, Niger,
Ce sont ces trois pays qui
Niger,
ont été
AOS,
constitués
these three
fondamentalement pour
countries
l'Alliance. Donc,
which
la Côte d'Ivoire
created
n'est pas
this alliance.
directement concernée. C'est
Côte
vrai que c'est dans la
d'Ivoire
même
is not
zone,
in
mais la Côte
this
d'Ivoire ne fait pas partie de l'Alliance.
alliance, even
OK.
if it's the same
Maintenant,
zone.
est-ce qu'il faut établir un lien entre
Do we have to
l'Alliance
make a link
et les différents
between
projets
this
réalisés par la
alliance
Chine? Je ne
and
le pense
this
pas.
a different project made by China. I don't think, because China projects which create China.
La coopération de la Côte d'Ivoire avec la Chine
The
remonte depuis
cooperation of Côte d'Ivoire to China goes to 1944.
J'ai pris 94 parce que
I took
c'est à partir de
1994.
ou du moins
It's because
95
since 94 or 95 at least, that the first cooperation project for
Donc, on signe les accords et on pose la
infrastructure
première pierre du
started.
palais de la culture en 95 et en 96, les projets commencent.
In
Et depuis
96, the
96
project
jusqu'à
started.
maintenant,
And since
la Chine
96,
réalise de
China
plus en plus de
is
projets.
realizing more and more
Malgré la
projects.
présence des Occidentaux, peut-être malgré la présence des entreprises françaises qui ont eu, en tout cas, une priorité, une mainmise, on peut dire, sur de grands marchés au niveau national. Et donc, si c'est le lien que vous voulez savoir, il n'y a pas de lien vraiment entre ces deux événements, puisque le pays, la Côte d'Ivoire, n'est pas concerné.
Côte d'Ivoire
C'est un
is not
peu ce que je veux
concerned
dire, mais
by
c'est plutôt, ce que nous
the
voulons
Sahel
montrer ici, en fait,
State Alliance.
c'est plutôt la diversification des partenariats, en fait.
We want to
Diversification des
diversify
partenariats, on voulait montrer, en fait, que si au début,
the
par exemple, tous les
relationship.
projets étaient contrôlés, tous les
At
grands
first,
travaux étaient
project
vraiment pilotés par les entreprises
were
occidentales,
were
aujourd'hui,
made by
on a la
Western
possibilité de
countries,
voir d'autres
but
partenaires
today
sur le
we
terrain.
have the
Et cela
possibility to have
dénote
different
d'un
partners,
changement quand
and
même
this is
très
very
profitable pour
big
la Côte
change,
d'Ivoire
which can be
Voilà.
good, great,
Donc, parce
good
que tout
for
comme
Côte
la Chine,
d'Ivoire,
il y a le Japon aussi qui commence à réaliser des projets d'infrastructure.
because
Il y a d'autres pays
China,
en tout cas, qui
Japan
essaient de
are
s'illustrer un peu dans
also
le domaine de
making
l'infrastructure
a
en Côte
project.
d'Ivoire. Donc, on dit simplement que si on continue sur cette lancée et que si par exemple, les appels d'offres peut-être sont un peu plus libérés, plus clarifiés, ça constituera peut-être, la présence de ces partenaires constituera peut-être un
So
avantage pour la
these
Côte d'Ivoire
new
dans ce
partners
processus de
will
développement.
be good
Donc,
for
c'est
our
là-dessus que
development.
nous voulons dire.
It's
Si nous
what
n'avons pas répondu
we
comme vous
want
le
to
souhaitez,
say.
vous pouvez répondre à la question et puis on va essayer de revoir
We
encore.
can continue to discuss more.
Non, merci, merci beaucoup Filomène, tu as répondu à la question et on ne va pas la reprendre parce qu'il y a d'autres questions bien entendu, à moins que notre ami donc du Niger puisse, s'il nous entend, donc monsieur Chekaraou Halidou, si tu nous entends, tu peux parler.
Of Niger can speak eventually, unless there are new questions.
Donc c'est notre ami du Niger qui a parlé sur le panafricanisme.
Notre friend of Niger will speak.
Je voudrais tout d'abord remercier l'Institut Schiller.
I want to thank the Schiller Institute.
Tous les participants à cette conférence internationale.
And all the participants in this international conference.
Je m'appelle M. Chekaraou Halidou Namaiwa, nigérien.
You correctly spelled my name.
Entre la Côte d'Ivoire et les pays de l'AES, particulièrement le Mali, je pense qu'il
Ivory
y a
Coast
des
and the
questions
AES, especially Mali.
des questions liées à la coopération que nous laissons aux autorités la latitude de voir la portée.
To the authorities, the dimension of the challenge.
Et effectivement, il s'agit sur la question qu'il est possible d'avoir de coopération institutionnelle
institutional cooperation
et la CEDEAO. Je pense
between the CEDEAO and the AES.
Et toujours dans le cadre de la coopération, effectivement, il peut y avoir
the framework of this cooperation, there can also be bilateral cooperation. It's not excluded.
De l'AES. Voilà un peu ce que je voudrais dire par rapport à la coopération. L'autre aspect en ce qui concerne l'énergie,
regarding energy,
une des questions qui talonne beaucoup la jeunesse
au niveau de
particulièrement au Niger.
Which worries many people, especially in Niger.
L'uranium du Niger est exploité
depuis uranium
et que notre
exploited since years. And Niger, our country, has incredible blackouts and energy cuts.
La société
qui exploite the firm which Urano, which worked with Areva, French firm.
A
big part of the French energy has been produced from uranium coming from Niger. Of course, the youth in Niger doesn't understand that its own resources are used for the energy for another country and not for themselves. Many Nigerians the connection breaks up. It's too bad. It breaks up. The connection is broken up.
L'illustration, malheureusement, en direct, ça a été coupé. Il parlait des délestages, puisque comme je le disais, hein, des connexions.
The cut is a demonstration of the energy failures.
Encore une quinzaine de minutes pour prendre des questions
We
dans la
still
salle.
have another 15 minutes. We take from the room. Monsieur, in the back.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'd like to address a question to Helga regarding an epistemological issue of Platonism versus Aristotelianism way of thinking. And we have, but let me elaborate a little bit, and then I set up the short answer, the short question. And basically, we distinguish in the Platonic tradition that comes from Plato, Cusa in the Renaissance, Leibniz, Gauss, Riemann, Einstein in the modern science, Lino Larousse in present time. On the other hand, we have the Aristotelian, from Aristotle, through the Middle Ages nominalism in modern times, modern economics, liberal, British liberalism, and sorry, but French illustration to a great extent as well, and not to mention the present post-human, post-Christian and pagan era we are living in, which is Aristotelian-driven, this process. And as this morning they comment, we are heading to a post-humanistic, maybe AI-driven post-humanistic era, which all of this is within the Aristotelianism. And well, but I go to the point. In Larousse organization, we understand the Platonic tradition as the way of creating and overcoming this crisis in contrast to the ecstatic Aristotelian way of thinking. And but at the same time, in the Aristotelian, I think there are things, methods of thinking that are not ontologically false necessarily, but we can use them as well as the whole process is driven Platonic, in the Platonic tradition. But there's a question. Is there anything we can save in the Aristotelianism, or is it completely false ontologically? Okay.
Gracias.
Well, I think that you probably can find in Aristotle certain things which you could say are useful, like in Kant, Immanuel Kant, you also find certain things which are, you can say they have a certain validity. But I think the crucial question is which method of thinking allows for new developments. As long as you are in systems which are essentially logical, there is no progress. You can perfect a system within the system, probably to nano dimensions, and becomes faster, quicker, whatnot. But you don't create anything qualitatively new. The reason why this Platonic tradition is so absolutely crucial is because it allows for hypothesis, in Plato, higher hypothesis, and even the method of hypothesis of the higher hypothesis. And that is a way of thinking where, for example, Nicolas of Course says that every human being recapitulates in his life the entire development of the physical universe up to that point. It's an incredible statement, you know, and assumes that naturally every person is part of that physical universe. And because everybody recapitulates that entire history, you can say, if you study it with absolute certainty, what must be the next necessary step. In other words, it gives you a method how to formulate an adequate hypothesis about that which has to be invented, which is completely different than the arbitrary, you know, arbitrary trial and error. You try this, you try that. Which, you know, there are many so-called sciences which use that method. Unfortunately, for example, a lot of medicine is really Aristotelian in the deepest sense that it is a trial and error method. You exhaust, the doctor starts, you know, most statistically likely disease you have, you know, and then you don't have that, and then it goes to the second most likely disease, treats that, and if you're lucky, you survive long enough, so the third one can be tried. But that is not really a scientific method. If you would take a different approach, you would discuss the fundamental features of what is life in the universe. What's the difference between creative reason as the most developed aspect of creative life in the universe? And you would, you know, it's an often used word, but you arrive at a holistic way of looking at the entire person, his environment, his family, and you have a sense of the health. For example, in China, it used to be, I don't know if it's still like that the doctor was paid if the patients were healthy, you know, and when the patient became sick, the doctor would not get any money. So that's a much better way of, you know, creating a motivation for that kind of research. So I think, you know, you do not get around the idea that, you know, you have to take all of these thinkers together to arrive at the adequate approach. In my view, the whole question of the aesthetic education of the soul and the character is absolutely important because, you know, AI, you know, I fully agree naturally with what Jacques said, but, you know, the discussion in China about AI is, and also in Russia, is completely different. Basically, they think that it's a very useful thing, that it will enable men to do exactly what Jacques was saying, you know, that you only have a work day of 3 hours, and the rest, or maybe Diane said it, yeah, Diane said it, and that the rest of the day you spend in self-perfection, education, you know, that, you know, in a certain sense, all the labor which is done by the animals of burden, so to speak, by donkeys or machines and so on, the men should not do this anymore because it's a waste of the creative potential. Now, if a technology, including AI, is a positive thing or a negative thing, entirely depends on the human beings who are using it. I mean, you know, you can use any technology, dual technologies, but even a knife from the kitchen, you can use it to cut bread, and you can cut the throat of your neighbor. You know, it's always entirely the intention of the human beings. So therefore, I think what we need in respect to AI is a convention among nations, you know, which totally regulates this, but including, you know, if we don't improve the moral character of the people. I mean, we have a cultural crisis in the West beyond belief. I mean, why do you think our societies are falling apart? Why do you think we have all this school violence, drug addiction, you know, violence in the brutalization of society? If you watch TV, now I don't watch TV anymore because I get sick in the stomach if I do. Because in Germany, you have no more movies which have a plot, or a story, you have only criminal stories. And if you start looking at them, there is some meaningless, senseless violence, perversion, pornography, drug addiction, stabbing. In gruel detail, you see the most unbelievable things every time. So, you know, that is an expression that we are in a dark age, in a deep dark age. And, you know, the question of aesthetic education and going back to the sources, like the Pope emphasized, Nicolaus did, is we have to create a new renaissance. So how do you create a new renaissance? You go back to the most advanced periods of the past, you reactivate them, you make them known again among the various countries, and then out of the dialogue among cultures, between the best traditions of each, there will come a new renaissance which will, you know, celebrate what was accomplished, but also create something new, but in a lawful way, using what the previous one was. Not like the modern times, which throws out the classics, which throws out history, which throws out everything, and then says, let's do something crazy. You know, let's do the most crazy thing, and then you get the most notoriety in the media, and they celebrate that. Why? Because it stupefies people. Why is it that the studying and education of classical music, poetry, painting is so absolutely crucial? Because it strengthens the lawfulness of the mind to be creative. All this modern stuff, I hate to say it, all these things of the post-Christian values turn people back into beasts. And, you know, no beast is as bad as people can become when they undergo this kind of brainwashing. So if we want to solve all of this, you know, problems we have discussed in respect to colonialism and all of it, we need a moral, cultural renaissance in the Western countries, because we are in the worst shape you can possibly think. And people are used to it. They don't cry anymore. If they would have a self-conscious idea where our societies are, we would have convulsions.
Thank you. Alors malheureusement, on est très en retard. Enfin, on n'est pas très en retard, mais on n'est pas en avance. Donc on va prendre une très courte question.
We're running behind time. So we'll take one more question with a short answer by Jacques Cheminade.
Non, mais d'accord. Question très courte de Madame, vraiment très courte.
Question from Mrs.
Pour revenir sur le plan Oasis, par rapport donc
to the Oasis plan.
Ça me paraît vraiment extrêmement
important. I find this very important, especially in regard to what Agatha Larouche just said, because of the crisis in spiritual values and values. We've been very polluted in the industrialized countries by the wrong type of thinking, and it's been and it has entered into our brains so that we've become disassociated in terms of values.
Alors votre question, s'il vous plaît.
Qui est la cible de la... Non, mais c'est important parce que justement, il faut comprendre qu'actuellement, nous n'avons pas le plan Oasis, c'est pour retrouver une
eau. The Oasis plan is important to find a shared water for Palestine, because Palestine doesn't have access to the water. But we also want to talk of something else. So maybe there's also a project to extract gas. So maybe it's a colonial type of war. So it's another kind of political ploy. And I think it's important to talk about the waters war taking place in the world. In December 2022, we privatized water, and now it's the last of the, what should I say? This is the last of the most violences in the world. Odile, do you want to say something?
En une minute.
Oui, très rapidement là-dessus, parce que le plan Oasis,
the Oasis plan is effectively
ce qui est absolument indispensable pour
Mais je pense que votre question,
for the
elle
region.
touche autre chose en réalité. C'est que de toute façon,
But I think your
la
question
logique
touches
même
another point,
d'un
which is
financier
the
prédateur,
logic
c'est d'aller toujours un
of
petit peu plus
the
loin
predatory finances,
dans
which
tout ce
means
qui
to
est
always go
envisageable.
further
Donc à chaque fois,
in
on
whatever
découvre un
is
nouveau,
we
comment
can
dire, on pense avoir atteint un
discover.
niveau d'horreur.
When
Et
we
on
think
s'aperçoit
we've
qu'il y a un
discovered,
nouveau
when we think we've reached an absolute
d'horreur.
limit
Alors,
on the
effectivement,
horrors that
bah
can
oui,
be that can
si
happen,
c'était
then we
possible de
realize there's
privatiser,
another.
peut-être qu'il y aurait des gens qui
So yes,
commenceraient
with
à
water
rêver
we
plus
saw
en
this
l'air,
with the
pourquoi pas.
privatization.
Voilà, enfin,
If there were a way to
quelque part,
privatize
c'est
air,
cette
there are
logique-là,
probably some
c'est
kind
une
of
logique totalement
people would try to
linéaire qui va
privatize
toujours vers
air.
le pire. D'où
And
ça,
this
ça
is,
met
but it's a
encore en
kind of
relief
thinking of
toute la
logic
question
which
de simplement de
goes
sortir de
from
cette
one thing to the
logique
worst.
de
So what we need to do
prédation et
is
de
to get
sortir
out
de
of
cette
this
logique
logic of
plus linéaire. C'est
predatoriness.
exactement
It's a linear logic, a linear way of thinking, and that was exactly what we discussed here, in particular, that Helga brought up.
Exprimés. On va avoir un deuxième
So we had
panel
some youth from
de la jeunesse du monde.
we had some youth from Africa who spoke today, and now we're going to have another panel with youth from Europe, from the United States, etc. You have another 20 minutes or so of a pause. But we have to ask everybody in the room to leave the room for about 20 minutes so that we can make some changes here. And Jacques, just a last word. In 2009, concerning France-Africa, I was invited to Niger with Niger for the Festival of Revolutionary Films. For Africa, there was a lot of interest. It was really extraordinary, warm, very good communication. People were very happy that I mentioned Sheikh Anta Diop in Sankara. There was a whole movement that started to come into place, and I saw ambassadors in front of me, ambassadors from China and from many other countries, including the United States. We got a lot of addresses, there was a lot of enthusiasm, but we never, ever again received an invitation to go there and speak. It was not because of the French ambassador, but he was not at all happy with what he had to do. But he was told that we had to be silent because we were free. That's one thing. The second thing, in this conference, for this conference, visas were denied to young people from 4 different countries: Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, and Equatorial Guinea. There were different pretexts given. In Nigeria, the French authorities were more sincere. They said, well, this conference does not have a sufficient level to permit us to grant a visa. So then all of that we've said here, which is so beautiful, we will do it anyway.
Donc on se retrouve dans une vingtaine de minutes et je vais demander encore une fois
we will be back in about 20 minutes, and I would again ask everyone to leave the room for the next.
Merci à tous et merci aux différents intervenants.
And thank you to the speakers.